The congressional hearing room in Washington, D.C. was a crucible of tension, taut as a bowstring on the verge of snapping. The air was heavy with anticipation, the usual veneer of civility, a fragile shell barely concealing the undercurrents of simmering anger ready to erupt. Rows of polished wooden chairs were filled with journalists, aides, and spectators, their eyes fixed on the long mahogany table at the room's center, where speeches were growing increasingly heated. This was supposed to be a routine government session, albeit a lively one, focused on national security and FBI oversight. But as the minutes ticked by, it was clear that something extraordinary was about to unfold. An event destined to be etched into the annals of political history. No one in the room could have anticipated the spectacle that was brewing. The audience, a mix of Trump supporters, progressive activists, and neutral onlookers, buzzed with murmurs as cameras clicked and smartphones glowed, capturing every moment. Social media was already alight with speculation, with users commenting from across the globe. Watching from Texas, "Let's go, Jasmine," one tweeted, while another from Florida posted, "Patel's about to dominate. America first." The digital world was as much a battlefield as the hearing room itself, and the stakes were sky high. At the center of the storm stood Kash Patel, the newly appointed FBI director under President Trump's second administration. Patel was a figure of sharp contrasts, a former prosecutor and national security advisor with a reputation for ruthless precision. He exuded a calm confidence that bordered on predatory. Behind the podium, the spotlight illuminated his chiseled features, accentuating his steely gaze and the faint smirk tugging at his lips. He adjusted the microphone with a slow, deliberate motion, like a violinist preparing to play the first note of a symphony. The room, filled mostly with Trump supporters, seemed to belong to him before he even spoke. Their applause was thunderous, a chorus of loyalty that drowned out the scattered claps from Crockett's allies. Across the table sat Representative Jasmine Crockett, a Texas Democrat known for her fiery rhetoric and passionate advocacy for marginalized communities. Upright in her chair, her hands rested lightly on the table, but her eyes flickered slightly as if sensing the storm approaching. Crockett was no stranger to high-stakes debates, having built a career as a public defender and a vocal critic of systemic injustice. Yet today she faced an opponent unlike any other, a man whose preparation was as meticulous as his delivery was merciless. Patel began, his voice low, clear, and sharp as a blade. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on Crockett, "we are here to discuss the future of national security, the rule of law, and accountability. As the leader of the FBI, I am tasked with protecting this nation from threats, both foreign and domestic." He paused, letting his words sink in, then tilted his head slightly, a thin smile appearing. "But I wonder, are all of us here truly equipped to grasp the complexities of these issues?" The remark, though delivered softly, was the first arrow aimed directly at Crockett. The room erupted in faint chuckles from Trump supporters, while a few of Crockett's allies clenched their fists, struggling to stay composed. Patel continued, his voice now carrying a subtle hint of sarcasm. "Representative Crockett, I deeply admire your passion, but allow me to ask, how can someone primarily known for social media posts contribute to the complex decisions Congress makes on national security?" He emphasized social media as if it were a stain, a cheap tactic unworthy of the hallowed halls of government. The laughter rose again, louder this time, sharper, like a knife twisting deeper into Crockett. She took a deep breath, striving to regain control. Standing, her eyes burned with resolve, her voice clear but tinged with strain. Mr. Patel, I'm not here to show off on social media. I'm here to represent the people of Texas who trusted me with their vote. I am a lawyer. I've worked in courtrooms fighting for those without a voice. I understand the law, and I'm here to ensure it's enforced fairly. Her words carried passion but lacked the sharpness needed to counter Patel's surgical strike. A few in the room nodded, but most leaned toward Patel, awaiting his rebuttal. He smiled, not a triumphant grin, but the confident smirk of someone who knew he held the upper hand. Leaning forward, he rested his hands on the podium, his voice colder, more cutting. A lawyer, yes, he said, emphasizing the word as if it were a mockery. But Representative Crockett, being a public defender is one thing. Shaping national security policy is an entirely different arena. Are you certain your experience equips you to handle the threats the FBI faces daily? He paused, letting the question hang, then delivered a subtle jab. Or are you just skilled at stirring emotions on social media, where a hashtag can mask a lack of understanding? The room exploded. Applause from Trump supporters thundered, while conservative journalists typed furiously, capturing every word. On social media, a post from a prominent account went viral. Cash Patel just torched Crockett. Crockett down Crockett tried to stay composed, but her hands tightened, her eyes scanning the room for support, but finding only curious or indifferent stares. One of her allies, another representative, subtly shook their head, as if signaling she needed to change tactics. Crockett stood again, her voice now tinged with urgency. Mr. Patel, I'm not here to play hashtag games. I'm here to fight for those the system overlooks, those your FBI seems to ignore. I've seen how the law can be twisted, and I won't sit quietly while you turn it into a political tool. Her words carried weight, but her emphasis on you inadvertently revealed her anger, signaling to the audience that she was being swept up in emotion. Patel didn't miss the opportunity. He tilted his head slightly, as if considering her words, then responded with a calm yet razor-sharp tone. Emotion, Representative Crockett, is something that easily leads people astray. We're not here to tell heartwarming stories. We're here to address real issues with facts and logic. If you want to talk about twisting the law, perhaps you should revisit some of your own social media statements where you've called law enforcement agencies hostile. How can we trust someone like that to oversee the FBI? He ended with a direct look into the camera, as if speaking to the millions watching. Crockett sat down, her eyes now betraying clear unease. An aide whispered something to her, but she only nodded slightly, trying to mask her tension. Patel, still standing behind the podium, brushed his suit sleeve lightly, as if dusting off dirt after an easy fight. He cleared his throat, a deliberate pause that drew every eye to him. Representative Crockett, he began, his voice warm but laced with subtle disdain. Since you claim to be a champion of justice, let's test your understanding of the legal foundations that protect our nation. Can you explain the significance of the Supreme Court's ruling in Youngstown Sheet and Tube, Covey Sawyer for executive authority, particularly in the context of today's national security operations? The question landed like a thunderbolt, its complexity a calculated move to expose any gaps in Crockett's knowledge. The 1952 case, a landmark in constitutional law, was intricate enough to challenge most but specific enough to demand precision, Patel's perfect weapon. Crockett's eyes narrowed, her mind racing to recall details of the case. She stood, bracing her hand on the table for stability, her posture striving for confidence despite her hesitation betraying her. "Mr. Patel," she began, her voice careful but guarded. "The Youngstown case dealt with limits on presidential power. Specifically, when President Truman tried to nationalize steel mills during the Korean War, the Supreme Court ruled he overstepped his authority because the action wasn't supported by Congress or the Constitution. The answer, while fundamentally correct, lacked depth, skimming the surface of the case's complex implications. A few audience members nodded, but MAGA supporters exchanged smirks, sensing weakness. Patel pounced like a hawk. His face adopted a feigned curiosity. "Not bad, Representative," he said, tilting his head as if indulging a novice. "But you've only scratched the surface." Youngstown established a three-tier framework for evaluating executive action. Justice Jackson's concurrence, to be clear. Can you explain how this framework applies to the FBI's current counterterrorism operations, or is that a detail beyond your grasp? The words, delivered with gentle ruthlessness, drew laughter from the audience. The question was a brilliant move, requiring not just legal knowledge, but the ability to connect historical precedent to modern policy. A bridge Crockett wasn't ready to cross. Crockett's lips parted, then closed, the silence stretching like an accusation. She glanced at her notes, a fleeting move caught by the cameras, highlighting her uncertainty. "Well," she ventured, her voice now less assured, "the framework, it's about checks and balances, ensuring the executive doesn't overreach. For the FBI, that means operations must follow congressional oversight." The response was vague, faltering, and failed to meet Patel's specific challenge. A murmur of discontent rippled through the room, and a MAGA supporter shook their head, muttering to the person beside them. Patel advanced, his gaze locking onto her like a predator's. "Checks and balances," he repeated, his tone tinged with mockery. "Nice slogan, but sadly not an answer. Let me clarify for you, Representative. The Youngstown framework divides executive action into three zones. Zone 1, the President acts with Congress's approval, holding maximum authority. Zone 2, the Twilight Zone, requires a compelling rationale. Zone 3, when the President acts against Congress, is the least protected. Now, can you tell this room how this applies to our counterterrorism efforts? Or must we assume your legal expertise stops at platitudes?" The crowd erupted, applause thundering. Social media lit up with posts. "Patel schools Crockett. Crockett down." Crockett clenched her fists, her composure beginning to crack. She stood taller, as if sheer will could salvage the moment. "Mr. Patel," she said, her voice rising, laced with defiance and frustration. "I'm not here to play legal trivia games. I'm focused on ensuring the FBI served the people, not just the interests of the powerful. Youngstown is about protecting democracy, which I fight for every day." Her words were passionate but off-target, failing to engage Patel's challenge. A few progressive allies clapped weakly, but most of the audience remained unmoved, their eyes fixed on Patel's next move. He didn't disappoint. "Democracy," Patel said, savoring the word like a chess master spotting checkmate. A noble goal, Representative, but noble goals don't run the FBI. Knowledge does, strategy does, and frankly, your inability to articulate a basic legal principle raises serious questions about your competence on this committee. He turned to the camera, addressing millions of viewers. The American people deserve leaders who grasp the complexities of the law, not just wave the flag of justice when it suits them. The room erupted again, MAGA supporters standing to cheer. A journalist tweeted, "Patel just buried Crockett with one question." Game over. Crockett sat down, her hands clenched to hide their trembling. Her allies exchanged worried glances, one whispering urgently, but their support was a mere drop against the tidal wave of Patel's dominance. Internally, Crockett's mind reeled with self-doubt. She had entered this hearing prepared, but Patel's precision was unlike anything she'd faced. He wasn't just debating, he was dissecting her piece by piece in front of the world. Patel, still exuding absolute control, smoothed his tie, a small gesture screaming victory. His gaze returned to Crockett, his smile now a blade. "Representative," he said, his voice low but carrying a deadly promise. "Let's move to a topic closer to your experience. Perhaps you can enlighten us about your legal career, specifically the cases you chose to defend." The question hung in the air. A new trap set, and Crockett's heart sank. She knew what was coming, and for the first time, she felt the full weight of Patel's relentless strategy crushing her. The atmosphere in the congressional hearing room now resembled an arena, the studio lights highlighting Patel's icy gaze as he prepared to deliver his next blow. An attack aimed not just at Crockett's knowledge, but at her very character. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto her, his voice low but sharp as a cut. "Representative Crockett," he began, his tone polite but dripping with mockery. "I'm impressed by your passion for defending the voiceless. But allow me to ask, when you chose to stand by those accused of crimes, thieves, violent offenders, was that truly justice or merely a bid for attention?" The question, cloaked in feigned concern, was a spear aimed at Crockett's past as a public defender. The room buzzed with murmurs, some Patel supporters nodding, as if he'd uncovered an obvious truth. Crockett stood, struggling to regain her composure, her eyes scanning the room for support. "Mr. Patel," she replied, her voice now edged with defiance, "as a public defender, I stood up for those who had no one else. I fought to ensure they got a fair trial, not crushed by the system just because they were poor or powerless. That's real justice, not a stunt for attention." Her words burned with passion, but her emphasis on real justice betrayed her emotions, leaving her vulnerable. A few Democratic allies clapped, but the sound was sparse, drowned by faint chuckles from Patel's supporters. Patel didn't miss a beat. He tilted his head like a teacher correcting a student and responded. "Real justice," he echoed, his words laced with gentle scorn. "Admirable, Representative, but let me share a more specific story. In 2018, you defended a defendant in a Texas domestic violence case. This individual, per the record, reoffended shortly after release. Do you believe your decision then served justice, or did it put your community at greater risk?" The meticulously prepared question was a devastating blow, turning Crockett's past into a liability. The room fell silent, all eyes on her, awaiting her response. Crockett drew a breath, trying to hold her ground. Mr. Patel, she said, her voice slightly shaky but striving for resolve. Every case I took was about ensuring the right to a fair trial. I don't control my client's actions afterward, but I believe everyone deserves a chance. That's the principle of our legal system. Patel's cold grin cut through the room. Principles don't protect families from your choices, Representative, he said, deriding Crockett's defense of her legal career. As a prosecutor, I prioritize safety. He turned to the audience, his gaze conspiratorial. Do your voters know you defended those who endangered them? The room erupted in applause, MAGA supporters cheering. Crockett sat, panic in her eyes, hands clenched. She tried to retort, but Patel's raised hand silenced her. Representative, good intentions aren't enough for national security, he said, his voice sharp. Americans need leaders who prioritize reality over ideals. The applause grew louder, some chanting his name. Crockett's head bowed, her knuckles white. A Democratic ally offered support, but doubt consumed her. Patel wasn't debating. He was dismantling her. Standing like a fortress, Patel shifted his attack to her social media. You called the Department of Government Efficiency a scam. Why? He asked, his tone a trap. Crockett stood, defiant but trembling. It slashes programs for the needy to favor the wealthy, she said, targeting Elon Musk. The audience jeered, one shouting, You hate success? Patel let the silence wound her, then struck. Doge saves billions for the people you claim to represent. Did you read the plan, or just a headline? The room roared, an ex-post going viral. Patel crushes Crockett. Crockett, down her response, laced with anger, faltered. Those cuts strip essentials from the poor, she said, but her emotional tone weakened her. A MAGA supporter laughed. Calm down, lady. Patel's voice cut through. Emotions aren't facts. Doge serves all Americans. Why attack instead of solve? Cheers erupted. Crockett's desperate retort, I fight for the voiceless, slipped when she called him lady, sparking laughter. Patel's final blow was calm. If you can't discern truth from emotion, reconsider your role. The room exploded, chanting his name. Crockett sat, defeated, her eyes vacant. Patel, unshaken, shaped the narrative. She's done, a conservative aide whispered. The cameras captured Crockett's bowed head as Patel's victory echoed.